I stood in that conference room, my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it as Admiral Warren's words cut through the suffocating silence like a knife through steel. The man I had saved in that Category 2 storm, the family I had risked everything for, they were his daughter, his grandson. And Captain Briggs, the man who had made my life a living hell for the past 3 months, who had stripped me of my position and my dignity, who had turned me into a cautionary tale about weakness and emotion in the military, that man's face had gone from smug confidence to absolute horror in less than 5 seconds. The Admiral's eyes sharp as broken glass fixed on Briggs, with an intensity that made grown men squirm. "So tell me, Captain," his voice was deadly calm, "when Lieutenant Hayes violated your precious regulations to save my family, when she put her career on the line to pull my daughter and grandson out of a burning vehicle in the middle of a hurricane, your response was to destroy her career, to make an example of her, to teach everyone under your command that compassion is weakness." I could feel every pair of eyes in that room on me. Lieutenant Miller, who had mocked me in the hallways and spread lies about my character, looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. Lieutenant Daniels, one of the few who had stood by me, was fighting back a smile. And Briggs, Captain Richard Briggs, the man who had told me just that morning that I would never amount to anything in the Navy, was speechless. But before I tell you how I got to this moment, before I share how sweet that victory tasted after months of humiliation and isolation, I need you to do something for me. If this story resonates with you, if you have ever been punished for doing the right thing, if you have ever stood up for your values when everyone told you to sit down and shut up, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel because I share real stories about real courage, about people who refuse to compromise their integrity even when it costs them everything. And drop a comment below telling me about a time you chose your conscience over convenience. Your story matters. Your voice matters. Now let me take you back to where it all began. It was 3 months earlier, on a night that would change my life forever. The hurricane warning had been broadcast for 6 hours, but our mission could not wait. I was driving a supply truck through what meteorologists were calling a once-in-a-decade storm, transporting classified equipment that absolutely positively had to reach the naval station by 600 hours. The rain was not just falling, it was attacking. Horizontal sheets of water crashed against my windshield with such force that my wipers were useless. I could barely see 3 feet ahead of me. Captain Briggs's words echoed in my head as I gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled hands. "Lieutenant Hayes, under no circumstances are you to stop this vehicle. I do not care if the President himself is standing in the road. You do not stop. You do not deviate. You deliver that cargo on time." Is that crystal clear? I had nodded, saluted, and climbed into that truck, knowing that I was about to drive through hell. The wind was howling like a wounded animal, and I watched tree branches the size of telephone poles cartwheel across the road. My headlights cut weak paths through the darkness, barely illuminating the flooding that was starting to cover the asphalt. I was making good time despite the conditions, my training kicking in, my focus absolute. I would complete this mission. I would prove that I deserved the promotion I had been working toward for 2 years. That was when I saw them. At first, it was just a shape in the storm, a dark mass that did not belong on that empty road. As he got closer, my heart sank. An SUV stopped dead in the middle of the highway, smoke pouring from under the hood. The emergency flashers were barely visible through the rain, and there, illuminated for just a moment by a flash of lightning, was a man standing outside the vehicle, waving his arms desperately. I started to ease off the gas. Every instinct I had, every value my parents had raised me with, every reason I had joined the Navy in the first place told me to stop. But Briggs's words were there too louder now. "You do not stop for any reason." I could see the promotion letter in my mind, could imagine him ripping it up if I failed this mission. I pressed harder on the gas pedal. Then I heard it. Even through the storm, even through the thick walls of my truck, I heard it. A child crying. Not just upset, but terrified. The sound of a little boy who thought he was going to die. I saw the man's face more clearly in my headlights, now saw the absolute desperation there, and I looked past him into the SUV. A woman was holding that child, and even from a distance, I could see that they were both shaking violently. Not from fear. From cold. The kind of cold that shuts down your organs and stops your heart. My foot hit the brake before my brain had finished making the decision. The truck's tires screamed against the wet pavement, the cargo shifted behind me with a crash that I knew would show up in the damage report, and I came to a stop about 20 feet from their vehicle. For 3 seconds, I sat there, my hands still on the wheel, knowing that I had just ended my career. Knowing that Briggs would crucify me. Knowing that everything I had worked for was about to disappear. Then I opened the door and stepped out into the storm. The rain hit me like a physical blow, instantly soaking through my uniform. The wind nearly knocked me off my feet. I ran toward the SUV, and the man practically fell toward me. Up close, I could see he was well-dressed, despite the situation, expensive suit ruined by the rain, but what struck me was his eyes. This was not some reckless civilian who had ignored the warnings. This was a father who had been caught in circumstances beyond his control and was watching his family die. "Please," he shouted over the wind, "my wife and son, the engine caught fire. We cannot get warm. I think they are going into hypothermia." He grabbed my arm and I could feel him shaking too. I called for help, but nobody is coming. "Please, I know you are military. I know you probably have orders, but please do not leave us here." I looked back at my truck, at the classified cargo, at my career, sitting in that driver's seat. Then I looked at the woman in the SUV, at the little boy who could not have been more than 5 years old, at the way his lips were turning blue. I thought about what my grandmother used to tell me. "Emily," she would say, "there will come a moment in your life when you will have to choose between what is easy and what is right. That moment will define who you really are." "Get back in your vehicle," I told him, my voice steady despite the chaos around us. "I am going to hook you up and tow you out of here." I ran back to my truck, grabbed the tow chain from the equipment locker, and worked faster than I ever had in my life. My fingers were numb from the cold, the rain was blinding me, and somewhere in the back of my mind a voice was screaming that I was throwing away everything I had worked for. As I secured the chain, a massive oak tree fell less than 50 yards behind us with a crash that I felt in my bones. If I had not stopped, if I had driven past them, that tree would have fallen directly on their SUV. They would have died instantly. The man saw it too, and when our eyes met, I saw something that made all of this worth it. Not gratitude. Recognition. He understood that I had not just saved their lives. I had chosen their lives over my own future. "What is your name?" he called through the CB radio once we were connected and moving again. His voice was rough with emotion. "Lieutenant Emily Hayes," I replied, focusing on navigating around debris and fallen power lines. There was a pause longer than it should have been. "Lieutenant Hayes," he finally said, "you are going to regret this decision." My hands tightened on the wheel. "If saving your family means ending my career, I can live with that regret. I could not live with leaving you there." The rest of that drive was a nightmare of split-second decisions and near misses. Another tree fell, this time in front of us, and I had to reverse and find an alternate route, adding 40 minutes to our journey. A flash flood started to sweep across the road, and I had to gun the engine to make it through before the water got too high. Every second that passed was another nail in my career's coffin, but every second that passed was also another second that little boy got to be alive. I dropped them at the emergency shelter, refusing their attempts to thank me, refusing to even tell them which base I was stationed at. I did not want their gratitude. I did not want them to try to intervene on my behalf. I had made my choice, and I would face the consequences alone. I got back in my truck and drove the final 30 miles to the base, arriving 4 hours late, with a cargo manifest that showed signs of the rough transport. The sun was just starting to rise when I pulled into the loading dock. I was soaking wet, exhausted to my core, and I knew what was waiting for me. Sure enough, I had barely gotten out of the truck when a corporal approached me with barely concealed satisfaction. "Lieutenant Hayes, Captain Briggs wants to see you immediately. He is in his office." I followed him through the morning drills and the breakfast crowd, and I could feel people staring. Word had already spread. The Navy was not a place where secrets stayed secret for long. Briggs's office was on the 3rd floor, a corner space with windows that looked out over the harbor. On a normal day, it was a beautiful view. That morning, with the storm clouds still hanging heavy and dark, it looked like a painting of Judgment Day. I knocked twice, sharp and professional, and heard his bark. "Enter." He did not look up when I walked in. He was reading something at his desk, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. Finally, after what felt like an hour but was probably 30 seconds, he lifted his eyes to mine. I had never seen such cold fury in another human being. "Sit down, Lieutenant, I Saturday." He stood, and that was a power play. He wanted to tower over me, wanted me to feel small. He picked up a file from his desk and dropped it in front of me. It landed with a slap that made me flinch. "Do you know what this is?" I did not answer. "This is your disciplinary report. This is the documentation of how you, Lieutenant Emily Hayes, violated Sections 7A, 7B, and 7C of the Classified Transport Protocols. This is the proof that you delayed critical military cargo by 4 hours, that you exposed that cargo to unnecessary risk, and that you directly disobeyed a clear order from your commanding officer." His voice was getting louder with each sentence, and I could see the vein in his temple starting to pulse. Do you have anything to say for yourself? I took a breath, keeping my voice level and professional. Sir, there was a family stranded in the hurricane. A woman and a small child who were going into hypothermia. If I had not stopped, they would have died. Briggs slammed his hand on the desk so hard that his coffee cup jumped. The lives of civilians are not your concern when you are executing a military operation, Lieutenant. National security is not negotiable. Do you think you are some kind of hero? Do you think this is a movie where you get to save the day and everyone applauses? He leaned forward, his face inches from mine. You are a liability. You are weak. You are emotional. And you have no place in my command. I felt something crack inside me, but I did not let it show on my face. With all due respect, sir, I joined the Navy to protect people, not to let them die because of a bureaucratic regulation. His laugh was harsh and mocking. Is that what you think this is about? Bureaucracy. This is about discipline, Lieutenant. This is about following orders even when they are hard. This is about being part of something bigger than your own bleeding heart. He sat back down and pulled out another form. I knew what it was before he said anything. Effective immediately, you are relieved of your logistics duties. You are being transferred to the records department. You will spend your days filing paperwork and updating databases. And you will do it until I decide you have learned what it means to be a real officer. Dismissed. I stood saluted and walked out of that office with my head high. But the moment I was in the hallway, the reality of what had just happened hit me like a physical blow. My career was over. Everything I had worked for, every sacrifice I had made, gone because I had refused to let a child die. I made it to the bathroom before the tears started, locking myself in a stall and letting myself break down for exactly 5 minutes. Then I washed my face, straightened my uniform, and walked to the records department to begin my new assignment. The next 3 months were the worst of my life. The records department was in the basement, a fluorescent-lit cave of filing cabinets and outdated computers. My office was a desk in the corner, half hidden behind a broken copy machine. The work was mind-numbing, entering endless streams of data into systems that had not been updated since the 90s, filing reports that nobody would ever read. But worse than the work was the isolation. Word had spread about what I had done, but the story had been twisted. Lieutenant Miller, my former colleague who had always resented my promotions, had made sure everyone knew that I had put civilians above national security and nearly compromised a classified mission. He conveniently left out the part about the dying child. In the mess hall, conversations would stop when I walked by. In the hallways, people would avoid eye contact. I had become a cautionary tale, a warning about what happened when you let emotions cloud your judgment. Miller himself made it his personal mission to make sure I never forgot my fall from grace. He would walk past my desk in the basement, always with a smirk, always with some cutting remark. How is the view down here, Hayes? I hear basement air is good for the complexion. Or he would be just loud enough for me to hear as he talked to other officers. Can you believe they actually considered her for a promotion? Thank God Briggs saw through her before she could do any real damage. There was one young officer, though, who did not avoid me. Ensign Daniels had just been assigned to the base, fresh out of the academy with ideals still intact. At first, he kept his distance like everyone else. I could see him watching me sometimes, clearly curious about the disgraced lieutenant in the basement, but too smart to risk being associated with me. That changed about 6 weeks into my exile. I was working late updating a particularly tedious set of supply chain records when Daniels came down to retrieve some old personnel files. He was polite, professional, did not even make eye contact. But as he was leaving, he dropped a folder and papers scattered across the floor. I got up to help him gather them, and he looked at me, really looked at me for the first time. "Thank you, ma'am," he said quietly. Then so softly I almost did not hear it, he added, "I heard what really happened that night. My sister works at the emergency shelter. She told me about the family you saved, about the little boy." I froze, papers in my hands, not sure how to respond. He glanced toward the stairs, making sure we were alone, then continued. "I just wanted you to know that not everyone believes what Miller is saying. Some of us still think doing the right thing matters." He left before I could respond, but something shifted in me that day. I was not completely alone. The next week, Daniels started finding excuses to come to the records department. He would ask me questions about the filing system, about how to locate certain reports, and I began to realize he was doing it on purpose. He was making sure people saw him treating me with respect, making sure I had at least one ally in this place. The only other person who did not treat me like a pariah was Chief Petty Officer Morales, a master mechanic with 30 years in the Navy. He found me one afternoon, brought 2 cups of coffee down to the basement, and sat on the edge of my desk without asking permission. "Hayes," he said, stirring sugar into his coffee, "you know what I have learned in 3 decades of service?" I looked up at him surprised. "That the military needs 2 kinds of people. The kind who follow orders and the kind who know when orders are wrong. The problem is we only promote the first kind." He took a sip of his coffee and looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. "Back in '99, I was stationed on a destroyer in the Persian Gulf. We had orders to fire on a boat that was supposedly carrying insurgents. But something felt wrong to me. The boat's movements, the way it was sitting in the water, it did not match the intelligence we had been given. I told my commanding officer we should verify before engaging. He nearly had me court-martialed for questioning orders. What happened, I asked, already knowing I would not like the answer. Turned out my instincts were right. If we had fired, we would have killed a family of refugees. But for 2 years after that, I was passed over for every promotion, stuck in the worst assignments, treated like a troublemaker. The military does not reward people who think for themselves, Hayes. But that does not mean you were wrong." That conversation kept me going through the darkest days. When Miller would make another cutting remark, when another officer would look through me like I did not exist, when I would lie awake at night wondering if I had made the biggest mistake of my life, I would remember Morales's words. I had not been wrong. I had saved a life. That had to mean something. Then, about 10 weeks into my punishment, something changed. There were rumors of an admiral coming to inspect the base, some kind of surprise evaluation of our logistics operations. Captain Briggs was in a panic, micromanaging every detail, making everyone's life miserable as he tried to present a perfect picture of efficiency and discipline. I was ordered to organize every file in the records department to make sure everything was readily accessible for the inspection. The day Admiral Warren arrived, I was not even supposed to see him. I was in the basement doing my job, staying out of sight like I had been told. But then, about 2 hours into the inspection, I got a call from Briggs's assistant. "Lieutenant Hayes, report to Captain Briggs's office immediately." My stomach dropped. What had I done wrong now? Had I misfiled something? Had Miller spread another lie? I climbed those 3 flights of stairs with dread building in my chest. When I reached Briggs's office, the door was open and I could see Briggs standing at attention. And there, sitting in the chair that usually held junior officers being disciplined, was a man in an admiral's uniform. Admiral Warren. I had seen his picture, of course, but in person he was even more imposing. Silver hair, sharp features, eyes that seemed to see right through you. "Lieutenant Hayes reporting as ordered, sir," I said, standing at attention in the doorway. Admiral Warren turned to look at me, and something flickered across his face. Recognition. No, that was impossible. We had never met. "Come in, Lieutenant Briggs," said his voice tight with false pleasantness. "The Admiral has some questions about our recent logistics operations." I stepped into the office, standing at parade rest, trying to figure out what was happening. Admiral Warren was studying me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "Lieutenant Hayes," he said, his voice measured and calm, "I understand you were recently reassigned from active logistics duty to records management. Can you tell me about the circumstances of that reassignment?" This was a trap. It had to be. Briggs was standing right there, and anything I said could be used against me. "Sir, I made a decision during a classified transport operation that my commanding officer deemed inappropriate. I accept full responsibility for my actions and the consequences thereof. It was the safest answer I could give, admitting nothing, defending nothing." "I see," the Admiral said. He looked at Briggs. "Captain, would you say Lieutenant Hayes's reassignment has improved the efficiency of your command?" Briggs practically preened. "Absolutely, sir. It has sent a clear message that emotional decision-making and insubordination will not be tolerated. Discipline is the foundation of an effective military unit, and I have worked hard to maintain that standard." The Admiral nodded slowly. "And tell me, Captain, in your years of command, how many lives have your high standards saved?" Briggs blinked, clearly not understanding the question. "Sir, I do not understand." "It is a simple question," Admiral Warren said, his tone hardening just slightly. "How many civilians owe their lives to your rigid adherence to protocol?" The air in the room changed. I could see Briggs starting to realize that something was very wrong with this conversation. "Sir, my duty is to the mission, not to civilians. That is what separates us from them. That is what makes the military effective." The Admiral stood up, and even though Briggs was taller, he somehow seemed smaller in that moment. "Lieutenant Hayes," the Admiral said, turning to me during that transport operation, "did you complete your mission?" I hesitated, then answered truthfully, "Yes, sir." The cargo was delivered intact, though, 4 hours behind schedule. And was there any permanent damage to the equipment? No, sir. The post-transport inspection showed only minor shifting, nothing that affected operational capability. And the family you stopped to help, what was their condition when you brought them to safety? Now, I was really confused. How did he know about the family? How did he know any of this? Sir, they were suffering from hypothermia, but the shelter staff said they would recover fully. The Admiral nodded, then turned back to Briggs with an expression that could freeze fire. So let me see if I understand correctly, Captain. Lieutenant Hayes, faced with an impossible situation, managed to save 3 civilian lives and still complete her classified mission with no loss or damage to equipment. And your response was to punish her, to exile her to a basement, and to use her as an example of failure. Is that an accurate summary? Briggs was pale now. Sir, she violated direct orders. She put the mission at risk. Regulations clearly state. I have read the regulations, Captain, the Admiral interrupted. I wrote half of them. But I also remember why we have a military in the first place. Lieutenant Hayes, you are dismissed. Wait outside. I saluted and left the office, my mind racing. I stood in the hallway trying to make sense of what had just happened, and I could hear raised voices from inside the office, though I could not make out the words. Daniels came walking down the hallway, saw me standing there, and raised his eyebrows in question. I just shook my head. I had no idea what to tell him. After about 20 minutes, the door opened, and Admiral Warren stepped out. He looked at me, and this time there was no mistaking the expression on his face. It was the same look that the man in the storm had given me when he realized I was going to save his family. Walk with me, Lieutenant, he said. It was not a request. We walked in silence through the corridors, down the stairs, out into the morning sunshine. He led me to a bench overlooking the harbor, the same harbor I used to look at from Briggs's office, and gestured for me to sit. For a long moment, he just looked out at the water. Then he spoke. 12 weeks ago, I was driving home with my daughter and grandson. My daughter's husband, my son-in-law, is deployed overseas. She was staying with us while he was away. We were coming back from my grandson's birthday party at his friend's house when the storm hit. It came up faster than the weather service predicted, and before we knew it, we were trapped. The rain was blinding, the wind was pushing us all over the road, and then our engine caught fire. I felt my breath catch in my chest. No, it could not be. I have seen combat, Lieutenant Hayes. I have been in situations where death seemed certain. But nothing has ever terrified me like watching my grandson turn blue from the cold, like hearing my daughter crying because she thought her son was going to die. And then out of nowhere, a military truck stopped. A young officer, soaked to the bone, risked her career to save us. He turned to look at me now, and I could see the emotion he was holding back. I did not know your name until I started asking questions. I did not know that you had been punished until I read your file. But when I saw that disciplinary report, when I read Briggs's description of your actions as insubordination and emotional weakness, I knew I had to come here myself. Sir, I managed to say, my voice rough, I did not know. I had no idea they were your family. He smiled a sad smile. If you had known, would it have changed your decision to stop? I thought about that honestly. No, sir. I would have stopped anyway. They needed help. That, he said, standing up, is exactly why you belong in this uniform, more than men like Briggs ever will. The next morning, I received orders to report to the main conference room at 0900 hours. This was unusual. Junior officers did not get called to conference room meetings unless something serious was happening. I put on my best uniform, polished every button, and showed up 15 minutes early. The room was already filling with officers, everyone from the base's senior staff. Briggs was there, looking confident as always. Miller was there, smirking at me. Daniels caught my eye and gave me a small nod of encouragement. Admiral Warren entered at exactly 0900, and everyone snapped to attention. Be seated, he said, his voice carrying easily through the room. I am here today because I have been conducting a comprehensive review of this base's operations, particularly its logistics and personnel management divisions. What I have found has been both impressive and deeply troubling. Briggs was sitting up straighter, clearly ready to accept praise for the impressive parts. Captain Briggs, you run a tight ship. Your efficiency ratings are high, your mission completion rate is exemplary, and your discipline is, as you like to say, ironclad. Briggs nodded, unable to hide his satisfaction. Thank you, sir. However, the Admiral continued, and that one word dropped the temperature in the room by 20 degrees. Efficiency without humanity is not strength. It is tyranny. I have reviewed the case of Lieutenant Emily Hayes, and I have to ask you, Captain, does the cargo from that night, the classified equipment she was transporting, does it still function? Briggs looked confused. Yes, sir, of course. And did she complete the delivery? Yes, sir, though, significantly delayed. So the mission was successful. Technically, yes, but. And the family she stopped to help, if she had not stopped, what would have happened to them? Briggs's jaw tightened. That is speculation, sir. We cannot know what would have happened. Admiral Warren's expression went from stern to something harder, something colder. Captain Briggs, I can tell you exactly what would have happened. I was in that vehicle. That was my daughter and my grandson freezing to death while you were sitting in your warm office judging the woman who saved their lives. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear my own heartbeat. I could hear Miller's sharp intake of breath. I watched the color drain from Briggs's face as the reality of his situation hit him. He had spent 3 months punishing the woman who had saved his admiral's family. There was no coming back from this. Sir, I did not know, I had no idea that it was my family. The admiral cut him off. Would it have mattered? Should it matter? Lieutenant Hayes stopped to save 3 human beings and you punished her for it. You created an environment where following regulations is more important than saving lives. You turned a hero into a pariah because she had the courage to do what was right instead of what was easy. He walked over to where I was sitting and everyone's eyes followed him. Lieutenant Hayes, please stand. I stood, my legs shaking slightly, not sure what was happening. In recognition of your exceptional courage, your sound judgment under extreme conditions, and your unwavering commitment to the values that the Navy is supposed to represent, you are hereby promoted to the temporary rank of Operations Officer, effective immediately. You will oversee all humanitarian logistics operations for this base. I felt the world tilt. This was not happening. This could not be happening. Captain Briggs, the Admiral continued, turning back to face him. You are relieved of command, effective immediately. You will be transferred to an administrative position pending a full review of your command decisions. You are dismissed. Briggs stood, his face a mask of shock and humiliation, and walked out of that conference room without a word. Miller looked like he was going to be sick. And Daniels, wonderful Daniels, was grinning so wide I thought his face would split. The meeting continued for another hour, with the Admiral outlining new protocols, new guidelines that would allow officers to exercise humanitarian judgment without fear of punishment. He called it the Samaritan Clause, and he said my name would be on it. When the meeting finally ended, people approached me carefully, some to congratulate me, some to apologize for their treatment of me over the past months. I accepted both with as much grace as I could muster, but inside I was reeling. Just yesterday I had been the basement pariah. Today, I was being held up as an example of everything the Navy should be. Miller approached me last after almost everyone else had left. He looked smaller, somehow deflated. Hayes won. He started, then seemed to lose his nerve. I want you to know that I was just following Briggs's lead. I did not really think you were wrong. I was just trying to. You were trying to advance your career by stepping on mine. I finished for him. I know exactly what you were doing, Miller. He had the decency to look ashamed. For what it is worth, I am sorry. I looked at him for a long moment, this man who had made my life hell for 3 months, who had spread lies about me, who had mocked me in front of our peers. Part of me wanted to tear into him to make him feel a fraction of the pain he had caused me. But I thought about that little boy in the storm, about the choice between what was easy and what was right. You know what, Miller? I believe you are sorry. Sorry you bet on the wrong horse. Sorry your strategy did not pay off. Sorry you got caught on the wrong side of the Admiral. But I do not think you are actually sorry for what you did to me. I stepped closer to him, and he actually took a step back. I am going to give you a piece of advice. Figure out what kind of officer you want to be. The kind who builds people up or the kind who tears them down. Because let me tell you, there is no satisfaction in success that comes from someone else's suffering. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. I moved out of the basement and into an actual office with windows and everything. Daniels became my right hand, proving himself to be as competent as he was loyal. Morales continued to be my unofficial advisor, dropping wisdom between sips of coffee. And I began the work of changing the culture of our base. It was not easy. Years of Briggs's iron-fisted leadership had created an environment where people were afraid to show compassion, afraid to deviate from protocol even when protocol was clearly wrong. I started small, creating spaces where junior officers could voice concerns without fear of retribution, establishing mentorship programs, and most importantly, making it clear that I valued people who thought for themselves. The Samaritan Clause became official policy 6 weeks after my promotion. It stated that any military personnel who took reasonable humanitarian action to save lives would not face disciplinary action provided they still made every effort to complete their assigned mission. My case was used as the model taught in officer training schools as an example of decision-making under pressure. About 2 months after that conference room meeting, I received a letter. It was from Briggs. My first instinct was to throw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a single page handwritten. Lieutenant Hayes, it began, I am writing this letter from my new assignment at the Pentagon, a desk job processing paperwork for procurement decisions. It is the kind of position I used to assign to officers I deemed unfit for real service. The irony is not lost on me. I have had a lot of time to think about my actions, about the way I commanded, about the values I actually upheld versus the values I claimed to uphold. I was wrong. Not just about you, but about everything. I thought strength meant inflexibility. I thought leadership meant never showing compassion. I thought the mission was more important than the human beings carrying it out. You proved me wrong and I hated you for it. I am sorry. I am sorry for what I did to your career. I am sorry for the example I set. I am sorry that it took the Admiral's intervention for me to see what I had become. I have recently applied to volunteer with Doctors Without Borders as a logistics coordinator. I want to learn how to serve people the way you did without needing orders or regulations to tell me what is right. I do not expect your forgiveness. I do not deserve it. But I wanted you to know that you changed more than just policy that night in the storm. You changed me. Captain Richard Briggs. I read that letter 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and put it in my desk drawer. I was not ready to forgive him, not yet, maybe not ever. But I appreciated the acknowledgement. And I hoped for his sake that his transformation was real. 6 months after the storm, I stood on the deck of a naval vessel watching the sun set over the Pacific. I had been promoted again this time to the permanent rank of lieutenant commander, and I was now heading a new division, focused on humanitarian operations in disaster zones. Daniels was with me now, a full lieutenant and my second in command. Morales had finally accepted that promotion he had been turning down for years, joining my team as our senior technical advisor. The water was calm, nothing like that night when I had made the decision that changed everything. Sometimes I still thought about that moment, about the split second where I had to choose between my career and my conscience. People called me brave now, called me a hero, but I did not feel brave. I felt like someone who had simply refused to be the kind of person who could drive past a dying child. Admiral Warren had become an unexpected mentor. He checked in regularly, offered guidance when I needed it, and made sure I had the resources to build the program I envisioned. His grandson, the little boy from that night, had sent me a drawing once. It was a picture of a truck in a storm with a superhero driving it. His mother had written on the back, "Thank you for giving me more birthdays with my son." I kept that drawing in my office right next to my commission certificate. On the days when the bureaucracy felt overwhelming, when I had to fight for funding or justify why compassion should be part of military protocol, I would look at that drawing and remember why any of this mattered. It was not about the promotions or the recognition or even about proving Briggs wrong. It was about that little boy getting to grow up. It was about his mother getting to watch him blow out candles on future birthday cakes. It was about making sure that the next time a service member faced an impossible choice, they would not have to sacrifice their career to do what was right. Miller eventually requested a transfer to another base. I approved it without comment. I heard later that he had found his footing under a different commander, someone who valued integrity over politics. Maybe he had learned something after all. Maybe we all had. The hardest part of my new position was not the work itself, but learning to trust my team the way I needed them to trust me. For 3 months in that basement, I had learned to rely only on myself, to expect betrayal from every corner, to see enemies in every shadow. Undoing that damage took time and conscious effort. Daniels helped with that. His unwavering faith in me, even when I doubted myself, reminded me that not everyone was a Briggs or a Miller. Some people genuinely wanted to do good work and be part of something meaningful. We had just completed our first major humanitarian mission, delivering supplies to a coastal town devastated by flooding. The local officials had tears in their eyes when they thanked us, not because we were military, but because we had treated them like human beings who mattered. That was the difference between my leadership and Briggs's leadership. He had trained people to follow orders. I was training people to think about why those orders existed in the first place. One evening, about 8 months after that night in the storm, I was working late in my office when there was a knock on my door. I looked up to see a young ensign, fresh-faced and nervous. Ma'am, I am sorry to bother you, but I heard you were the person to talk to about. She hesitated, clearly afraid of saying the wrong thing. About what happens when you are ordered to do something that feels wrong. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. Sit down and tell me what is going on. She sat twisting her hands in her lap. My commanding officer, he is not doing anything illegal exactly, but he is cutting corners on safety protocols because it makes us more efficient. He says that is what leadership looks like, choosing the mission over comfort. But I am worried someone is going to get hurt. I leaned back in my chair, seeing so much of myself in this young woman. She was terrified of speaking up, terrified of being labeled a troublemaker, terrified of ending up in a basement filing paperwork for the rest of her career. Let me tell you something, I said. There is a difference between comfort and safety. And there is a difference between efficiency and recklessness. If you genuinely believe someone is going to get hurt, then you have a responsibility to speak up. But what if I am wrong? She asked. What if I ruin my career over nothing? I smiled a little sadly. What if you are right and you say nothing? Could you live with that? She was quiet for a long moment. No, ma'am. I do not think I could. Then you already know what you need to do. Document everything. Build your case. And when you are ready, come back to me. I will make sure you are heard without retaliation. She left looking a little less afraid, a little more determined. That was the real victory, I realized. Not my promotion or Briggs's downfall or even the Samaritan Clause. The real victory was that young ensign believing she could speak truth to power without destroying her life. The real victory was changing the culture so that doing the right thing was not an act of career suicide. As I prepared to leave my office that night, I stopped by the window and looked out at the harbor. The lights from the ships reflected on the dark water, creating patterns that shifted and changed with every wave. I thought about the officer I had been before that storm, the one who had been so focused on advancement that she had almost forgotten why she wanted to advance in the first place. I thought about the officer I was, now someone who had learned that real leadership was not about blind obedience, but about knowing when to follow rules and when to follow your conscience. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniels. Ma'am, just wanted to let you know that the supply requisition for the next humanitarian mission was approved. We deploy in 2 weeks. I smiled and typed back. Outstanding work, Lieutenant. Get some rest. His response came immediately. Yes, ma'am. But first, Chief Morales and I are grabbing dinner at the base restaurant. You should join us. You have been working too hard. I almost declined out of habit. I had spent so many months alone that solitude had become comfortable. But then I remembered what Morales had told me once. The strongest steel is forged in the hottest fire, but even steel needs to cool down sometimes, or it becomes brittle. I needed my team. I needed connection. I needed to remember that being strong did not mean being isolated. Give me 15 minutes, I replied. I will meet you there. As I gathered my things and locked my office, I passed by Miller's old workspace. Someone new occupied it now, a bright young lieutenant who reminded me a lot of Daniels. I had made a point of mentoring him, of making sure he understood that ambition and integrity were not mutually exclusive. He was doing well, thriving even under leadership that valued character over cunning. The base restaurant was crowded with the dinner rush, but I spotted Daniels and Morales easily at a corner table. They waved me over and I slid into the booth with them. We talked about work for a while, about the upcoming mission and the logistical challenges we were facing. But then Morales, with that uncanny ability he had to read people, changed the subject. Hayes, he said, using my last name the way he always did. Do you ever regret it? That night in the storm, knowing what it cost you, would you do it again? It was a question people asked me sometimes, usually in interviews or at speaking engagements. But coming from Morales, I knew it was not rhetorical. He genuinely wanted to know. Every single time I said without hesitation. The 3 months in that basement were the hardest of my life. Having Briggs destroy my reputation, having Miller spread lies, watching my career circle the drain, it was all terrible. But you know what would have been worse? Driving past that SUV. Living the rest of my life knowing I had let a child die because I was too afraid to violate protocol. That would have destroyed me in ways that Briggs never could. Daniels nodded slowly. I think that is what people do not understand about courage. It is not about being fearless. It is about choosing what you can live with. Morales raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. To choosing what you can live with. And to commanders who remember that we are human beings first and sailors second. We clinked our cups together, and in that moment I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Peace. Not happiness exactly, because the scars from those 3 months were still there and probably always would be. but peace with my choices, peace with who I had become, peace with the knowledge that I had stayed true to myself even when it would have been so much easier to just follow orders. The conversation drifted to lighter topics, and I found myself laughing at one of Morales's stories about a training exercise gone wrong back in the 90s. This was what I had been missing during those months of isolation. Connection. Camaraderie. The reminder that I was not alone in believing that the military could be both disciplined and compassionate. As I walked back to my quarters that night, I thought about the letter Briggs had sent me. I had not responded to it, was not sure I ever would. But I hoped he was serious about his work with Doctors Without Borders. I hoped he was learning what I had learned, that true strength comes not from inflexibility but from knowing when to bend. That leadership is not about forcing people into molds but about helping them become their best selves. That saving a life will always matter more than saving face. The night sky was clear, stars scattered across the darkness like diamonds on velvet. Somewhere out there, that little boy I had saved was probably asleep in his bed, safe and warm. His mother was probably kissing him goodnight, grateful for another day with her son. His grandfather, the Admiral, was probably reviewing reports or planning strategy, but also taking a moment to appreciate that his daughter and grandson were alive because a young lieutenant had chosen conscience over career. I was not the same person who had driven that truck into the storm. That Emily Hayes had been good at following orders, good at checking boxes, good at doing exactly what was expected of her. This Emily Hayes was something different. I was someone who had learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to do what you are told. Someone who had discovered that real honor is not about medals or promotions or even about following the chain of command. Real honor is about being able to look at yourself in the mirror and know that you did what was right even when it cost you everything. The path from that basement to this command position had not been a straight line. There had been setbacks and struggles, moments when I had questioned whether I had the strength to keep going. But I had learned something crucial in that journey. You do not have to be fearless to be brave. You just have to care more about doing what is right than about protecting yourself from consequences. And now, as I prepared to lead my team into situations where we would have to make impossible choices, where we would have to balance mission requirements with human needs, where we would constantly walk the line between protocol and compassion, I knew I was ready. Not because I had all the answers, but because I had learned to trust my moral compass even when the regulations pointed in a different direction. The military had not broken me when it tried. Instead, it had forged me into something stronger than I had been before. Not stronger in the sense of being harder or more rigid, but stronger in the sense of being more authentically myself. And that, I realized, was the real lesson of that night in the storm. You cannot sacrifice your humanity for your career, because without your humanity, your career becomes meaningless. So here is what I want to ask you. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between doing what was expected and doing what was right? Have you ever stood at that crossroads where one path led to safety and approval and the other led to uncertainty and possible punishment, but also to peace with your own conscience? What did you choose? And if you chose the safe path, do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had been brave enough to choose differently? I am not saying everyone needs to risk their career the way I did, but I am saying that we all face moments where we have to decide what kind of person we want to be. Moments where the easy choice and the right choice are not the same. And in those moments, you have to ask yourself what you can live with. Can you live with playing it safe? Or would you rather live with the consequences of doing what you know in your heart is right? Drop a comment below and tell me about your moment. Tell me about the time you chose courage over comfort, or tell me about the time you wish you had. Your story matters. Your choices matter. And maybe by sharing our experiences, we can remind each other that we are not alone in struggling with these impossible decisions. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that integrity is worth fighting for even when the cost is high, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel because I share real stories about real people who refuse to compromise their values even when the world told them they were wrong. And share this video with someone who needs to hear that doing the right thing is never the wrong choice, even when it feels like everything is falling apart. Remember, you are stronger than you think. You are braver than you feel. And the world needs people who will stop in the storm to save a life even when every voice around them is screaming to keep driving. Be that person. Be the one who chooses conscience over convenience. Be the one who proves that honor and compassion are not weaknesses, but the truest forms of strength. Thank you for listening to my story. Now, go out there and write your own.